Hello again. In this segment we take up Ray Franz's crisis and detail his progressive removal from the Watchtower as he finally comes to the conclusion that what the Watchtower is teaching is not the gospel. And I suppose it is at such a time that you can no longer let sentiment and attachments, fleshly attachments or spiritual, even love, attach you to an organization which has departed from the gospel. Ray Franz goes on, the day before I took off for Paris on the first leg of my trip to West Africa, November 16, 1979, the Society's president was presiding at the morning Bible text discussion, that being his week to serve as chairman. In his comments, he stated that some were questioning the Society's position set forth in a recent Watchtower, that Jesus Christ is the mediator only for the anointed ones, and not for the other 2 million of Jehovah's Witnesses. He said of such ones, quote, they would merge everyone together and make Jesus Christ the mediator for every Tom, Dick, and Harry. End of quote. I could not help but think of all the Toms and Dicks and Harrys there present in the headquarters family, and wondered how those words would sound to them. I knew that there was considerable discussion within the family on this subject, some of it definitely unfavorable. The president went on to affirm that the Society's teaching was right. The one text he referred to in Scripture was Hebrews, chapter 12, and the words, quote, it is for discipline you are enduring. God is dealing with you as sons. For what son is he that a father does not discipline? But if you are without the discipline of which all have become partakers, you are really illegitimate children, not sons. Unquote. He then gave the illustration of a horse whose master uses discipline to teach it to walk around in a circle. And he stated, quote, sometimes it may take a few lashes with a whip to get it to do this. Unquote. He urged anyone who had doubts about the Society's teaching on this point to hold on, take the discipline, and, quote, show that he has the guts to stick with it, unquote. Ray Franz here makes mention of the fact that Ed Dunlap, who had written the book Commentary on James in that decade, made the point that he did not think that Christians existed and survived by guts, but rather by faith. But the president said, you must have the guts to stick with it. And of course he's referring to loyalty again to the organization that is teaching that not all who are in relationship with the organization are in relationship with Christ, and that therefore by dint of logic, if you're not directly mediated by Christ, as the 144,000 are, who is your mediator? And of course it comes back to the organization as your mediator. Ray Franz goes on, that evening I took off for Paris, but for days I felt sickened, not merely by these words, but by the whole approach and spirit I had been witness to for the last few years. For me, it was evident from Scripture that Jesus Christ did offer his mediation to bring about reconciliation with God for every Tom, Dick, and Harry, and that his laying down his life for all persons, his providing the ransom sacrifice and making its benefits available to any and all who might choose to accept them, were the very opposite of the attitude expressed in that headquarters discussion. It seemed that we were hearing a different good news, not the good news as it was presented by the inspired writers of the first century. So this seems to be the turning point in Ray Franz's determination that he must do something, and soon, if indeed the gospel is not the gospel anymore. Then he talks about what happens in Africa in the next stage of his history. The next to last country I visited was Mali. Most of the missionaries there were French nationals. After working my way through a presentation in French of some points I was covering with missionaries in each country, I asked if they had any questions. The second question presented was, the Watchtower says that Jesus is the mediator only for the anointed, not for the rest of us. Can you clear this up for us? Not even in prayer is he our mediator? If it had been my interest to sow doubts, this would have been an obvious opportunity. Instead, I tried to calm them, pointing to the first letter of John, chapter 2, verse 1, which speaks of Jesus as the helper of those for whom he is a propitiatory sacrifice for sins, including those, John says, of the whole world. I said that even if he were not to think of Jesus as their mediator, they should surely think of him as their helper. And that of one thing they could be sure, that his interest in them was as great as his interest in any other persons on earth. I felt that I had managed to keep the matter from becoming a serious issue with them, and I had said nothing that in any way placed question upon the Watchtower statements. However, a few days later, on going to the airport to depart for Senegal, the missionaries came out to see me off. One of the women missionaries approached and asked me, "But not even in prayer is Jesus our mediator?" I could do nothing but repeat and re-emphasize basically the same points I had presented earlier in their missionary home meeting. I returned to Brooklyn after about 3 weeks, the only difficulty encountered in Africa being the derailment of a train on which I was making a 20-hour overnight trip from Ouagadougou, Upper Volta, to Abidjan in the Ivory Coast. Upon my return, the following morning at the breakfast table, a visiting branch committee member and his wife were seated next to me. Breakfast had barely begun when the wife wanted to know if she could ask me a question. I replied, "You can ask it, I don't know if I can answer it." She said that the previous night they had attended the study of the Watchtower dealing with the mediatorship of Christ, and she then asked virtually the same question that the French missionary in Mali had asked. I gave the same answer. That weekend, I went to New Jersey on a speaking assignment, and following the talk, a woman in the audience came up, an active witness, and said she had some questions. There were 3 questions, and the second was about Christ's mediatorship. Once again, I gave the same response. These incidents are cited because they represent my standard practice when questions arose from such persons, questions involving published teachings of the organization. Any question as to the scriptural backing for the organization's teachings that I myself had, I discussed only with personal acquaintances of long association, every one of them, in the case of men, being elders. Up until 1980, aside from my wife, I do not believe there were more than 4 or 5 persons on earth who knew to any real extent the concerns I had, and none of these knew all the reasons that caused these concerns. It would have taken a book such as this for them to have known that. I had not the slightest doubt, however, that many, many others among Jehovah's Witnesses had a number of the same concerns that I did. From my years in the governing body, I saw no evidence that those concerns would be frankly faced or given the consideration they merited by means of careful, thorough research of the scriptures, and decided not on the basis of traditional views long held, but on the basis of the biblical proof or lack of it. The evidence pointed instead to the conclusion that my open discussion of these difficulties was viewed as a great danger to the organization, as disloyal to its interests. Unity, actually uniformity, was apparently counted more important than truth. Questions about organizational teachings could be discussed within the inner circle of the governing body, but nowhere else. No matter how heated the debate on an issue within that inner circle, the body must present a face of unity or unanimity toward all those on the outside, even though such face actually masked serious disagreement on the point in question. Unity, not truth. Now again, the parallel with Jerry Gladson's experience in Seventh-day Adventism, where in the 1980s, after the famous theologian Desmond Ford had broken away from the movement and started to publish critical articles about its history, Gladson notes the aftermath of the fallout from that controversy in this way: the controversies of the 1980s, as challenging as they were, produced no theological modifications and few, if any, changes in polity. Rather, the denomination characteristically drew a line in the sand. We have no doubt, neither have we had a doubt for years, this is what Ellen G. White had written, that the doctrines we hold today are, and get this phrase, present truth. This notion of present truth based on a mistranslation of 2 Peter was rampant in Adventism, and of course Russellism is a form of Adventism. That's the end of Ellen G. White's statement anyway. There's no doubt in the minds of her generation, she says, that these present truths are truth. This is, of course, more than 100 years ago. And Gladson goes on, sadly, Adventists who profess to base their faith entirely upon the Bible are not willing to use the Bible to recheck their idea of identity. They merely accept that identity as an accurate interpretation of the Bible. Although Ellen White has largely shaped the Church's claims, it would be well to set forth the contemporary official Adventist position. Let me refer to two recent official Adventist statements. Quote, the SDA movement, this is the claim from the Adventist Encyclopedia, is the visible organization through which God is proclaiming the last special message for the world at this time. You may have already been alerted to the videos that are available from several Jehovah's Witness or ex-JW sources on YouTube, where the Adventists make similar very bold claims about the last things, specifically the years from 2015 to 2020. So then, again, the Adventist Encyclopedia says the SDA movement is the visible organization through which God is proclaiming the last special message. Now, when they say special message, they're in the same category as the Watchtower. If it's a special message, that is a new message, it's obviously in bad trouble with Paul's viewpoint from Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 to 9. A special message that is a badge issue of identity, which characterizes both Seventh-day Adventism and the Watchtower and the Mormons and innumerable other groups that are generally called cults, is by definition not the gospel. Next time we'll continue with Ray Franz and his struggle between loyalty to God and loyalty to the religion in which he was raised.